March 18, 1944, Northern Germany. The sky above Hanover shimmered like polished steel. Oberleutnant Heinz Knoke climbed through freezing clouds in his Messerschmitt Bf 109 G6, the sunlight glinting off its gun barrels. He had flown more than 200 combat missions, shot down bombers and fighters alike, and believed, once, that courage could turn the tide of war. Then he saw them. A formation, no, an armada, stretching horizon to horizon. Hundreds of American B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators, escorted by sleek P-51 Mustangs. Each bomber carried 10 men. Each could drop 5 tons of bombs. And there were so many that the sun itself seemed swallowed by aluminum wings. Knoke's radio crackled with panic. His squadron leader barked orders drowned by static and fear. Below, contrails twisted like white scars across the blue. Above, thunder rolled, not from the weather but from engines. As the first bombs fell toward Hanover's rail yards, Knoke realized what many in the Luftwaffe already feared but dare not say aloud. "We are no longer fighting men," he whispered. "We are fighting factories." That was the day Heinz Knoke knew the war was lost. In 1939, when the first German aircraft thundered across Polish skies, the Luftwaffe was the pride of a new empire. Its pilots were young, fearless, and convinced of their invincibility. They had grown up on stories of the Red Baron, of Knights of the Air, of destiny written in contrails and courage. Among them was a tall, sharp-featured cadet named Heinz Knoke, born in Hamelin, Lower Saxony, the town of the Pied Piper. He joined the Luftwaffe in 1939, barely 25 years old, and quickly discovered that flying wasn't just duty, it was transcendence. Up there, he wrote later, there was no politics, no fear, only speed and silence. By 1940, Knoke was flying with JG-52, one of the Luftwaffe's elite Jägerschwader fighter wings. He fought in the Battle of Britain, diving on RAF Hurricanes and Spitfires over the English Channel. He survived close calls, engine fires, and parachute jumps. In those early days, the Luftwaffe ruled the air. They believed, as their commanders told them, that no air force on Earth could match German training, tactics, or technology. Their Messerschmitt Bf 109s were marvels of engineering, light, fast, deadly. The pilots felt like hunters, not defenders. Britain's resistance was fierce, but even that defeat did not shake their faith in ultimate victory. Berlin said the war would be short. The Führer promised Europe would kneel. Knoke and his comrades believed him. Through 1941 and 1942, Luftwaffe squadrons fought from the Arctic to North Africa. They covered Rommel's Afrika Korps, escorted bombers over Sevastopol, and strafed Soviet tanks on the Eastern Front. The airfields buzzed with confidence. Ground crews painted victory tallies on fuselages, black bars that told stories of mastery. Knoke downed his first enemy aircraft near Calais, then another over the North Sea. Each mission was a test of will, precision, and endurance. But even then, small signs of strain appeared. Mechanics began to whisper about fuel shortages, about worn engines, about replacement parts delayed by bombed rail lines. Pilots rotated endlessly from front to front, chasing a war that no longer had clear lines. Still, morale remained high. Germany was winning, or so the propaganda said. Radio Berlin spoke of unstoppable progress, of new weapons, of the Reich's destiny in the air. Then came August 17, 1942, the first American daylight raid over Europe. A small formation of B-17 flying fortresses struck the marshalling yards at Rouen, France. German radar detected them too late. Knoke wasn't there that day, but word spread quickly through Luftwaffe bases. The Americans are coming, and they fight in daylight. At first, it was dismissed as foolish. Flying bombers in daylight meant suicide, the officers said. No formation could survive the firepower of a well-trained German wing. But the Americans returned, again and again. At first a dozen, then 50, then 100. Each time, they dropped more bombs, flew higher, stayed longer. And each time, the losses were acceptable to them. To Germany, they were a warning. Knoke later recalled the first time he saw the contrails of a U.S. formation stretching across the horizon. They were like a bridge of ghosts, silent and endless. No single man could stop them. By early 1943, Knoke had transferred to Jägerschwader 11, JG-11, defending the heart of Germany. He was now an Oberleutnant, a seasoned ace with dozens of missions behind him. The young men who joined his unit were barely trained, boys of 17, trembling in their flight suits. The Americans were coming in waves from England, part of the 8th Air Force under Lieutenant General Ira Eaker. Their B-17s and B-24s carried the war directly to Germany's industrial heart, to Bremen, Kiel, Wilhelmshaven, and Schweinfurt. Knoke's squadron scrambled almost daily to intercept them. Sometimes, they broke through the bomber stream and brought down giants in flames. Other times, they faced swarms of P-47 Thunderbolts, the new American escorts with firepower and range far beyond expectation. For every bomber they destroyed, 2 more appeared the next day. For every pilot lost, no replacement came. The skies over Germany were no longer a battlefield. They were an arithmetic equation, and the numbers no longer favored the Reich. By the summer of 1943, the Luftwaffe was bleeding. Fuel reserves were shrinking. Maintenance crews worked through nights lit by air raid sirens. Cities burned, and for the first time, Luftwaffe officers began to question the war itself. Knoke, who had once spoken of glory and fatherland, now wrote in his diary, "We are being asked to fight against the impossible. The Americans build faster than we can shoot." He had no idea how right he was. In that same summer, across the Atlantic, America's Willow Run plant in Michigan was producing one B-24 bomber every 63 minutes. Factories in Seattle, Fort Worth, and Tulsa ran day and night, powered not by ideology, but by sheer industrial force. Knoke couldn't see it, but he could feel it in the endless drone of bombers above, in the thinning lines of his comrades, in the silence of his commanders. The Luftwaffe's golden age was ending. The sky was changing, and deep down, in the heart of every German pilot, a new emotion began to replace pride, fear. By mid-1943, the air above Europe had become an empire of noise. Engines thundered over France, the Netherlands, and the Ruhr Valley. To the men on the ground, it was a distant storm. To the pilots of the Luftwaffe, it was the sound of extinction approaching one formation at a time. Heinz Knoke sat in his cockpit on August 17, 1943, staring westward from an airfield near Cuxhaven. The radio squawked with frantic reports. Massive formation inbound from England, hundreds of fortresses, altitude 20,000 feet. The Schweinfurt, Regensburg raid had begun, the boldest American daylight operation of the war so far. 376 B-17 flying fortresses of the 8th Air Force were crossing the North Sea in 2 waves, bound for the ball-bearing factories of Schweinfurt and the Messerschmitt assembly lines at Regensburg. Each silver speck in the sky carried 10 men, machine guns bristling from every angle. They flew in perfect formation, a city in motion, sunlight flashing off aluminum skins. Below them waited Knoke and the hunters of JG-11, JG-3, and JG-26, veterans of the old Luftwaffe, now thrown against a new kind of war machine. At 10:15 a.m., the first bombers crossed the German coast. Knoke's squadron climbed hard, contrails spiraling behind them like smoke trails from arrows. At 23,000 feet, they met the Americans head-on. A wall of fire, Knoke later wrote. Every B-17 was a fortress in truth, bristling with 50-caliber guns. We attacked, and it was like diving into a furnace. He saw his wingman, Lieutenant Friedrich Kaiser, vanish in an orange flash. Another comrade, Uff's, Hans Meyer, bailed out with his parachute in flames. Knoke pressed the trigger of his 30 million Malawian Quachas 108 cannon, felt the recoil slam through the cockpit, and saw one bomber's left wing tear open. For a moment, he exulted. Another kill, another victory mark for the fuselage. Then he looked up. For every fortress falling, 10 more filled the gap. There was no end, no break, no weakness. It was like fighting the ocean. The Luftwaffe claimed more than 60 bombers destroyed that day. But the cost was unbearable. Nearly 40 German fighters lost, and even more damaged. Knoke's fuel gauge was empty when he landed on fumes at Lüneburg. He walked across the field past burned wrecks of Bf 109s, his ears still ringing with radio static and gunfire. That night, he sat in the officer's mess with a cup of black coffee that tasted of oil and smoke. A staff officer read the reports aloud. Schweinfurt, factories hit, production disrupted. Regensburg, Messerschmitt line badly damaged. American losses, 60 bombers. Expected replacements, already underway from the U.S. Knoke stared at the map on the wall. The factories would rebuild. The Americans would return. But the pilots he had lost that morning, Kaiser, Meyer, dozens of others, were gone forever. We can shoot down 100, he wrote that night, but they will build 1,000. In Berlin, Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring fumed at his staff. He had promised Hitler the daylight raids would never succeed. Now the truth was clear. The Luftwaffe could no longer guarantee the skies. Factories across the Reich began to slow. Ammunition trains were late. Fuel convoys were destroyed. For the first time since 1939, the Luftwaffe was fighting on empty. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, American production surged. In Michigan, the Willow Run plant built one B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes. In Seattle, Boeing's Plant 2 turned out B-17s by the dozens each day. Each machine came with 10 trained crewmen, and behind them, hundreds more in reserve. In Germany, training programs were collapsing. Fuel shortages meant cadets flew only a few hours before being sent to the front. Knoke watched as boys younger than 20 climbed into cockpits with trembling hands. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow. They sent us children, he recalled later, and told us to hold back the sky. By October 1943, the Allied bomber streams had become living rivers of metal. The Luftwaffe called them der Bomberstrom, the bomber stream. On October 14th, during the second Schweinfurt raid, Knoke's wing was scrambled again. It became known forever as Black Thursday. 291 B-17s attacked, 60 never came back. But for Germany, the day was no victory. Knoke's group lost 9 fighters in 2 hours. One pilot collided head-on with a bomber, both exploding mid-air. Another was last seen diving, smoke trailing from his engine, canopy gone. That evening, as the surviving pilots gathered, Knoke heard his squadron commander whisper, "If the Americans ever find a fighter to stay with them all the way to Berlin, the war in the air is finished." No one knew that in England, engineers were already testing the answer. The North American P-51 Mustang. Winter came, and with it the steady erosion of the Luftwaffe's soul. Ground crews scavenged for parts from wrecks. Mechanics worked by lantern light under air raid sirens. Every morning, the horizon in the west glowed red. Not from dawn, but from burning cities. Knoke flew missions over Bremen, Hamburg, and the Ruhr, where Allied bombs fell like rain. He saw his homeland reduced to rubble, steel mills twisted into skeletons. The fires on the ground lit his cockpit from below, a red mirror of hell. Each sortie became a suicide run. The bomber's defensive fire was relentless. The escorting thunderbolts seemed to appear from nowhere. The Luftwaffe had once ruled the sky. Now it was drowning in it. Knoke wrote in his logbook, "I used to believe bravery could change fate. Now I know bravery is only a way to die." By the end of 1943, the Luftwaffe's losses had reached 1,000 aircraft a month. Entire squadrons existed only on paper. And in Berlin, rumors spread of an American raid so vast it would darken the sky itself. A strike not against soldiers, but against Germany's ability to exist. Heinz Knoke didn't know the name yet, but the Americans were preparing Operation Argument, what history would call Big Week. And when it came, the Luftwaffe would discover that courage, precision, and loyalty could not save them from the mathematics of modern war. The winter of 1944 began with silence, the kind that comes before storm. For weeks, the airfields of northern Germany lay under frost. Planes sat motionless under sheets of ice, Their once proud swastikas now faded by soot and cold. Mechanics burned engine oil in barrels to keep their hands warm. Fuel was rationed. Ammunition was scarce. But on February 20th, 1944, the silence ended. From the skies over England came a sound like thunder rolling over the sea, hundreds of bombers rising into formation. Operation Argument had begun, what the Americans would later call Big Week. The Allied goal was clear and merciless: destroy the Luftwaffe's aircraft industry, break its will to fight, and clear the skies for the coming invasion of Europe. The 8th Air Force struck from England. The 15th Air Force rose from fields in Italy. Together, they would hit the German heartland: Leipzig, Gotha, Regensburg, Augsburg, Stuttgart, and Brunswick. In total, 3,800 bombers, 3,000 fighters, over 10,000 airmen. To the Americans, it was strategy. To Heinz Knoke, it was the apocalypse. At Wernuchen Air Base, Knoke climbed into his Messerschmitt Bf 109G6 just as the sirens began. A message crackled through the control tower. Massive formation approaching Hanover. Altitude 22,000 feet. Knoke took off with Jägerschwader 11, his breath fogging the canopy. The air was thin, the horizon a band of pale silver. Within minutes, he saw them. Endless waves of B-17s and B-24s, each one glittering in the morning sun, flanked by P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings. The sky was no longer blue, Knoke recalled. It was silver and black, silver for the bombers, black for the smoke trails of the dying. He dove from above, firing short bursts into the formation. AB-17 peeled off, its left wing aflame. Knoke's fuel gauge flickered. Just 30 minutes of flight time left. He broke away, diving through tracer fire so thick it looked like rain. Below him, the towns of Braunschweig and Ostersleben were burning. The air war had turned from battle to annihilation. For the men of the 8th Air Force, it was no victory either. In Big Week's first 2 days, they lost 140 bombers, each with 10 men aboard. Crewmen were freezing to death at 25,000 feet. Oxygen masks iced over. Engines burst into flame. Yet they kept flying. Colonel Curtis LeMay, commanding the 3rd Bomb Division, told his men before takeoff, "You will destroy the German Air Force, or you will die trying." They nearly did both. Over Regensburg, German fighters tore through the first formation, claiming 20 bombers in minutes. But the stream never stopped. Wave after wave crossed the Alps, bomb bay doors opening in perfect unison, factories, airfields, and hangars vanishing in columns of smoke. By the 3rd day, Knoke's squadron was down to half strength. Most of his comrades were either dead or wounded. Those still alive flew aircraft patched with salvage parts. One engine from a Focke-Wulf, another from a wrecked 109. He wrote in his logbook, "We are exhausted. We fight until the guns jam, until the fuel runs dry. Then we land and fight again." But it wasn't just exhaustion, it was despair. The Luftwaffe command had run out of trained pilots. The once feared Jagdwaffe, the fighter force, was now a patchwork of teenagers and veterans clinging to survival. Knoke's new wingman, Oberfahrenheit Karl-Heinz Jaeger, was only 19. He lasted 3 missions. On February 24th, Knoke's unit intercepted bombers over Gotha, trying desperately to protect the Gothaer wagon fabric, a key plant for the Me-210 and Me-410 aircraft. They failed. By nightfall, the plant was rubble, and with it, 1/3 of Germany's fighter production capacity was gone. Then came the moment that sealed the Luftwaffe's fate. From the west, out of the sun, came sleek, silver fighters with long noses and slender wings, the North American P-51 Mustangs. They could escort the bombers all the way to Berlin and back. Knoke saw them first as glints on the horizon. He turned to intercept, believing they were P-47s. They weren't. The Mustangs dove with impossible speed, their .50 caliber guns stitching through the formation. They appeared, fired, and vanished, he wrote later. We had no answer to them. Within 2 weeks, the Luftwaffe had lost over 500 fighters and 100 pilots, many of them irreplaceable aces. Knoke's squadron, once a proud unit, was now a shadow of itself. By the end of Big Week, the Allies had dropped more than 10,000 tons of bombs on aircraft factories and industrial sites. Germany's production temporarily faltered, but the real victory was psychological. The Luftwaffe was broken. The Americans had proven they could strike anywhere, anytime, and return home. The skies that once belonged to Göring were now owned by the Stars and Stripes. Knoke's words from his diary captured it best. "We are not fighting for victory anymore. We are fighting for time for Germany to die more slowly." As March 1944 dawned, the Allied command prepared for the next phase, Operation Overlord. With the Luftwaffe crippled, the path was open for D-Day. Knoke still flew, out of loyalty, not hope. He would survive the war, but he would never forget that week when the sky turned to fire and the fate of Germany was sealed above the clouds. By the spring of 1944, Heinz Knoke's world had shrunk to a single desperate horizon, the Western Front. The Luftwaffe, once proud and invincible, was a ghost. Fighter groups that had once numbered hundreds now counted a few dozen aircraft, patched together with salvage parts and dwindling fuel. And yet, orders still came from Berlin. Hold the skies. Destroy the invasion before it reaches the beaches. It was a fantasy, but duty was all Knoke had left. May 1944 was strangely quiet. The endless bomber stream slowed. Allied fighters patrolled deep into Germany, but large raids became rare. The Luftwaffe command grew suspicious. Something massive was coming. Knoke, now a Staffel captain with Jagdgeschwader 11, was stationed near Rotenburg, northwest Germany. He spent his days flying short patrols over the North Sea, staring at a horizon filled with Allied reconnaissance planes. "They circled like hawks," he wrote in his logbook, "marking every road, every bridge. We knew they were preparing for something enormous." By late May, the rumor spread through every squadron mess hall. The invasion is coming. But no one knew where. Normandy? Calais? Holland? At 4:15 a.m., the phone rang in the ready room. Enemy paratroopers landing in Normandy. Allied ships in the Channel. Knoke ran to his Bf 109 G6, the cold air stinging his face. He could already hear the distant rumble, the sound of Allied naval guns hundreds of miles away, pounding the French coast. He took off with 4 other pilots from JG-11, climbing toward the Channel. The dawn was red, not with sunlight but with fire. Below, he could see the invasion fleet, a sight so vast it defied imagination. It was an armada without end, Knoke later said. The sea itself was armored. The Luftwaffe scrambled what little it had left. Only 319 German fighters were available to oppose the landings. The Allies sent more than 12,000 aircraft, bombers, fighters, transports, gliders, the largest aerial armada in history. Knoke's radio was chaos. "Spitfires over Cannes. Thunderbolts nearby you. We can't break through." He tried to dive on a column of C-47 Dakotas towing gliders toward Normandy. But before he could fire, P-51 Mustangs swept down from above. The dogfight was over in seconds. Tracer rounds stitched across his fuselage. His canopy shattered. He rolled the aircraft, dove into a cloud bank, and escaped, barely. When he landed back at base, the field commander was pale. "We have no reserves left," he said. The Americans owned the sky. By nightfall on June 6th, the Allies had landed 156,000 men in France. The Luftwaffe had managed only 250 sorties all day. Most German pilots never even reached the beaches. They were shot down before crossing the coast. Knoke sat in the dark, listening to distant artillery rumble across the Channel. He knew it then, Germany would never recover. We used to say the Führer commanded the land, the Kriegsmarine the sea, and the Luftwaffe the sky. But now, all three belonged to the enemy. In the weeks after D-Day, the Allies unleashed Operation Cobra, bombing entire German positions into dust. The Luftwaffe tried to respond, but every time a fighter climbed into the air, 10 Allied planes were already waiting. Knoke's squadron flew out of Wunstorf and Akmer, often intercepting American bombers bound for Paris, Rouen, or Cannes. The missions lasted less than 20 minutes, attack, fire, flee. He lost men almost daily. Lieutenant Horst Weber, his closest friend, was shot down by a Mustang over Le Mans. Oberfeldwebel Gunther Pape, another veteran, disappeared into the Channel. Every sortie cost us another comrade, Knoke wrote. The war had become a funeral that never ended. By August, the German army was retreating through France. Knoke watched from 10,000 feet as the roads filled with burning vehicles. The remains of the Falaise pocket, where 50,000 German troops were encircled and destroyed. The Luftwaffe could offer no help. American P-47 Thunderbolts prowled the highways, their 8 machine guns cutting down anything that moved. For the first time, Knoke saw the Luftwaffe's own soldiers, once masters of the air, diving for cover in ditches, terrified of the aircraft they used to command. The hunter had become the hunted, he said later. By September 1944, Knoke's group had fewer than 20 aircraft left. Fuel was so scarce that training flights were canceled. New pilots arrived with barely 3 hours of flying experience. And the bombers never stopped. By day, B-17s turned the Ruhr into ashes. By night, the RAF's Lancasters reduced entire cities to glowing ruins. Knoke flew on more out of habit than hope. He no longer believed in victory, only survival. Every time I took off, I told myself it would be the last, he recalled. And when I landed, I felt only disbelief. By late 1944, Germany was burning. Hamburg, Cologne, Berlin, the cities that once defined a nation now glowed orange against the night sky. From his cockpit, Knoke could see the fires stretching for miles. Factories, homes, cathedrals, all gone. And still, orders came from Berlin. Attack. Defend the Reich. But there was no Reich left to defend. In December 1944, the German army launched one final offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. The Luftwaffe threw everything it had into Operation Bodenplatte, a desperate New Year's Day strike against Allied airfields. Knoke volunteered, even though he knew it was suicide. He flew one of the few remaining Me-109s in his unit. They destroyed some planes on the ground, but at a terrible cost. Hundreds of German pilots lost in a single morning. It was the Luftwaffe's last gasp. We had struck one more blow, Knoke wrote, but it was like punching smoke. By now, he had no illusions. Germany was collapsing from the air downward, and the once mighty Luftwaffe was falling with it. But the story was not over yet. In the final months of 1945, Knoke would witness the rise of a new terror in the sky, one that burned faster, flew higher, and symbolized both Germany's desperation and its final defiance. Winter 1944. The Reich was dying. Every night, the bombers came, British Lancasters and Halifaxes, flying so high and in such numbers that anti-aircraft guns simply gave up. By day, the Americans followed B-17s, B-24s, and swarms of P-51 Mustangs that hunted anything with an iron cross. Heinz Knoke, now a Hauptmann, commanded what was left of Jagdgeschwader 11. His airfields were no longer fields but craters, frozen mud, scattered wreckage, the twisted frames of Messerschmitts. Fuel trucks were empty. Pilots slept in hangars with frost forming on their boots. And yet, in the middle of that ruin, something new appeared, a shape no one had ever seen before. In late December 1944, Knoke received orders to report to Lechfeld Air Base, near Augsburg. There, under heavy secrecy, the Luftwaffe was training a select group of pilots to fly a revolutionary new machine, the Messerschmitt Me-262 Schwalbe, the world's first operational jet fighter. When Knoke first saw it, he stopped in his tracks. The aircraft looked like it belonged to another world. Swept wings, twin engines slung beneath, a nose filled with 430 million Malawian Quach's 108 cannons. It could fly at 540 miles per hour, nearly 200 faster than any Allied propeller plane. It was not a fighter, Knoke wrote later. It was a comet. The future had come too late. Hitler believed the Me-262 would reverse the war. He ordered it converted into a Blitz bomber, a fast attack aircraft capable of striking London and retreating before interception. But the engineers and pilots protested. The jet was built to hunt bombers, not drop bombs. In the confusion of command, production stalled. Only a handful reached operational units by January 1945. Meanwhile, the Allies destroyed the factories that built them: Augsburg, Regensburg, and Obertraubling. Knoke was among the few cleared to fly combat trials. On January 28, 1945, he took off in a Me-262A-1A, call sign Yellow 5. The acceleration pinned him to the seat. There was no roar, only a deep metallic howl as the jet tore through the clouds. He reached 500 miles per hour in seconds. For the first time since 1940, he said, "I felt faster than death." 2 days later, Knoke intercepted a formation of B-17s near Hanover. The bombers filled the horizon, hundreds of them escorted by Mustangs. Knoke dove from above, his jet almost invisible until he fired. A single burst from his 30mm cannons tore through a bomber's fuselage. It fell flaming into the clouds. But as he turned for another pass, the engines coughed. Fuel starvation. He was forced to disengage and glide back to base. That was the curse of the Me-262. It was fast, powerful, but fragile. Each engine required special alloys Germany could no longer produce. Many jets burned out after just 25 flight hours. "We had a miracle in our hands," Knoke wrote, "but no strength left to use it." The Allies quickly adapted. Mustang pilots learned to attack Me-262s during takeoff and landing, when their jets were slow and vulnerable. They called it the rat-catching zone. On March 3, 1945, Knoke's squadron lost 2 jets that way, both destroyed before their wheels even left the runway. Fuel explosions lit the field like torches. Every time they scrambled, they risked dying before even lifting off. By then, Allied air supremacy was absolute. The 8th Air Force could dispatch 1,500 bombers and 900 fighters in a single mission. The Luftwaffe could barely launch 50 jets. By March, the war was collapsing everywhere. The Soviets were closing on Berlin from the east. The Americans had crossed the Rhine in the west. Germany was surrounded, and the Luftwaffe's bases were now little more than targets. Knoke flew one of his last missions on March 21, 1945, near Kassel. He shot down a B-24 Liberator, his 33rd confirmed kill. Moments later, shrapnel from a defensive burst ripped into his canopy, cutting his face and shoulder. He managed to land the crippled jet on a frozen field. He spent the next weeks in a field hospital, listening to distant artillery. The Reich was dying one city at a time. In April, an officer visited the hospital carrying orders. Hauptmann Knoke is to report to Flensburg for the defense of the northern sector. He never made it. By the time he was fit to fly again, there were no aircraft, no fuel, and no command left. The war had simply evaporated. He walked through what had once been an airfield. Only wrecks and ashes remained. The sound of engines had been replaced by silence. For 6 years, he said, the air had been our kingdom. Now it was empty. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered. Knoke was captured by British forces and sent to a prisoner camp. He survived the war, one of the few of his generation who did. Of the 12,000 Luftwaffe fighter pilots who served between 1939 and 1945, more than 10,000 were killed or missing. When asked years later what he thought of the Me-262, Knoke said, "It was perfection born in ruin. It could have changed the war, but by the time it flew, the war was already lost." After the war, the Allies seized dozens of Me-262s. They studied them, flew them, and built upon their design. From them came the F-86 Sabre, the MiG-15, and the jet-powered future that would define the Cold War. The aircraft that was meant to save the Reich instead became the seed of a new era, one where Germany's last weapon became everyone's beginning. Knoke lived until 1993, writing about his experiences not with pride, but with haunting clarity. His memoir, I Flew for the Führer, remains one of the few honest accounts of what it meant to watch a nation fall from the sky. War, he wrote, does not end when the guns fall silent. It ends when you stop hearing the echo of engines that never came back. The guns had fallen silent. Europe, for the first time in 6 years, was quiet, too quiet. No engines, no sirens, no bombers crawling across the sky. For Heinz Knoke, the silence was unbearable. He had survived the war, but the Luftwaffe, his comrades, his home, his purpose, had not. Where once there were squadrons of steel and pride, there were now fields of rusted wrecks and burned-out hangars. The war in the air had ended, but for the men who fought it, it would never truly stop. In May 1945, Knoke was captured by British troops near Lüneburg, northern Germany. He was taken to a prisoner-of-war camp in Norfolk, England, along with hundreds of other Luftwaffe officers. There were no interrogations at first, just silence, long days, and memories that refused to fade. At night, he would lie awake in his bunk, staring at the wooden ceiling, and hear phantom engines in his head. The echo of B-17s, the crackle of radio calls, the scream of falling aircraft. When the noise stopped, he later wrote, I realized how much I had needed it. The silence was not peace. It was punishment. By late 1945, the Allies began debriefing captured German officers. Knoke was questioned about the Luftwaffe's operations, about Göring, and about the factories that had fueled the air war. He told them everything he knew. The truth was no longer worth hiding. He spoke of endless missions, of boys sent to die after just a few hours of training, of orders for men who hadn't seen combat in years. We were not fighting for victory, he told a British officer. We were fighting because we did not know how to stop. He was not charged with war crimes. He had never participated in civilian bombings, nor in the atrocities of the ground war. But he carried a different kind of guilt, one that no tribunal could erase. I flew for a regime that built hell, he said, and in doing so, I helped it burn. In 1947, Knoke was released and returned to a Germany that barely existed. His hometown, near Hameln, was half in ruins. His airfields were gone, plowed under or turned into Allied bases. Everywhere he went, the ghosts of the past followed. Burned-out aircraft, wrecked cities, nameless graves. He worked briefly as a fisherman, then as a small-town administrator. But he could never escape the war. Every engine's sound, every storm overhead, pulled him back to the skies of 1943. I still looked upward, he said, expecting to see the fortresses returning. In 1952, Knoke began writing his memoirs. The result was I Flew for the Führer, a book that shocked even his own countrymen. Unlike many wartime accounts that glorified combat, Knoke's pages were filled with exhaustion, bitterness, and regret. He wrote of friends burned alive in cockpits, of boys too scared to fight, of victories that felt like defeats. There were no heroes in his story, only survivors. We were called Knights of the Air, he wrote. But knights do not die screaming. The book became one of the first honest German pilot memoirs to admit the futility of their war, and the moral blindness of believing courage could wash away guilt. In the 1950s, West Germany began to rebuild its military as part of NATO. Former Luftwaffe pilots were invited to train a new generation of aviators for the Bundesluftwaffe. Knoke declined. He could not wear a uniform again. Instead, he joined a veterans group that met once a month in Bremen. They spoke quietly, shared cigarettes, and remembered names no one else would say aloud. We spoke not of victories, he recalled, but of the men who never came back. We were all that remained of them. As the 1960s dawned, Knoke watched the jet age he had glimpsed in 1945 take over the world. The F-86 Sabre, the MiG-15, the Phantom II, all of them descendants of the Me-262 he had once flown. The same roar, the same speed, the same endless horizon, but now in the hands of nations that had survived what Germany could not. He admired the technology, but it haunted him. The machines lived on, he said, but the men who built them did not. By the 1970s, Germany had begun to confront its past. Museums opened, memorials were built, and the word Luftwaffe once again meant something, not pride but remembrance. Knoke visited one such museum in Munich in 1979. Behind glass stood the rusted remains of a Bf 109, its paint barely visible. He stared at it for a long time, hands folded behind his back. A young boy standing nearby asked him quietly, "Did you fly one of those?" Knoke nodded. "Yes," he said, "and it almost destroyed us all." Heinz Knoke lived long enough to see Germany become a peaceful, democratic nation. He never glorified his role in the Luftwaffe. Instead, he used it to teach others the cost of blind obedience. "We thought duty was honor," he told an interviewer in 1988. But duty without conscience is only destruction. When he died in 1993, his ashes were scattered near the North Sea, where he had once patrolled as a young fighter pilot, chasing shadows across the waves. The wind still carried the sound of engines, or maybe it was memory. Today, his words remain among the most haunting testimonies of the air war. "We thought the sky was ours. We learned it belongs to no one. The air remembers everything." The Luftwaffe that once darkened Europe now exists only in museums and the fading photographs of young men who never came home. The bombers they fought, the jets they feared, the missions they flew, all of it ended where it began, in the clouds. And for Heinz Knoke, the sky never stopped burning. The war ended long ago. But over Germany's quiet fields, where bombers once blotted out the sun, and over the North Sea, where fighter wings once shimmered like blades, the air still carries a faint whisper, the hum of the past. Heinz Knoke is gone now. So are the men of his generation, the aces, the bomber crews, the engineers who built machines that touched the edge of heaven and hell. Their skies have faded into history, their voices into static. But the lessons they left behind still echo. "Courage without conscience is ruin," Knoke once said. And a war fought for pride ends only in ash. In 1944, the Luftwaffe fought for survival. By 1945, it fought only for time. Every sortie was a death sentence delayed, a desperate attempt to hold back an enemy that could no longer be stopped. And yet, even in defeat, there was humanity, men trying to do their duty in a world collapsing around them. On the other side of the sky, young Americans, British, and Canadians flew through walls of flak. Each mission a gamble, each target a city filled with people they would never know. Both sides paid in blood. Both believed they were right. More than 400,000 airmen died in the European theater alone. Most were never found. Their remains still lie in forests, under fields, or deep beneath the North Sea. Somewhere, their aircraft rest, aluminum skeletons buried beneath the soil, engines rusting in silence. And when the wind passes over those fields, it sounds, for just a moment, like distant engines returning home. Today, German and American pilots train side by side. Their aircraft share the same runways. Their nations, once enemies, are allies. The same sky that once burned with war now carries the hum of cooperation. Jets streaking not toward destruction, but toward understanding. Knoke could never have imagined it in 1944, but perhaps somewhere he would have approved. Heinz Knoke never sought forgiveness, only truth. He left behind not tales of glory, but warnings wrapped in memory. He wanted the world to know that valor, without humanity, leads only to ruin. "If my story survives," he wrote, "let it be a message, not a monument." So when we look up at a clear sky, a contrail, a passing aircraft, we should remember what that silence once cost. Every line in the clouds, every glint of sunlight on metal, is built upon the memory of those who never came back. We must tell their stories, not to glorify them, but to understand them, not to celebrate war, but to ensure it never returns. Because the sky remembers everything, and so must we.